Queen Camila, with her heels tapping across the Buckingham courtyard and a sense of power in every step, turned to the guard and said, "Sit down, boy." She believed that she was reprimanding him. She was unaware that she was conversing with a Coldstream Guard who had in the past disarmed explosives in Helmand without blinking. The entirety of Britain was left in a state of stunned silence when he finally responded. Want to know how it all unfolded? First, click the subscribe button and like the video. Tell us in the comments section from where in the world you are watching from. Without further ado, let us continue. The wind that morning had teeth sharp, bitter, the kind that cuts through wool coats and makes tourists huddle closer to the palace barriers. Most people would have called it miserable weather for sightseeing. But Lance Sergeant Chike Adeyemi didn't mind the cold. He'd felt worse, much worse. Standing beneath the eastern archway of Buckingham Palace, he looked like a statue carved from discipline itself. 34 years old, Coldstream Guards, 10 years of service that had taken him from the sandstorms of Helmand to the stone courtyards of royalty. His red tunic didn't so much as flutter in the wind. His tall black bearskin hat added another foot to his already imposing height, and against the pale London morning, his dark skin seemed to absorb the gray light around him. But Adeyemi wasn't thinking about how he looked. Guards aren't paid to think about that. He was doing what he'd been trained to do since day one, watching. Not the crowd, not the tourists fumbling with their phones, but that invisible horizon every guard learns to find. The place where focus lives, where your mind can stay sharp, even when your body has to stand perfectly still for hours. Behind that stillness was a man who'd crawled through Afghan villages under sniper fire, who'd disarmed IEDs with hands steadier than a surgeon's, who'd walked patrols where every shadow could hide death. Now he guarded a palace, different battlefield, same discipline. The morning had started quiet. The formal changing of the guard finished over an hour ago. Most tourists had wandered off in search of tea and warmth, and only a handful of dedicated royal watchers remained behind the rope barriers. A school group from somewhere up north huddled together, their teacher trying to explain the significance of the uniforms, while the kids just stared at the giant hat. Adeyemi was covering the northeastern quadrant, while some minor diplomatic meeting wrapped up inside. Nothing special, nothing that required him to do anything except stand there and look official. He'd done this 1,000 times before. Then Queen Camila appeared. She wasn't supposed to be there. At least not then. Her schedule had her inside for another hour. But there she was, emerging through the Queen's gallery gate, with a small group, a couple of aides, 2 diplomats from some Commonwealth nation he didn't recognize. She looked irritated, the kind of controlled annoyance that comes from meetings running long, from having to smile at people who bore you, from the endless performance that is royal life. Her charcoal gray coat was perfectly tailored, her gloves expensive leather, her heels clicking against stone with the sharp precision of someone who'd never learned to walk quietly. Adeyemi registered her presence as part of his job, but didn't turn to look. Ceremonial guards don't gawk at royalty. They provide a backdrop silent and steady, while more important people do more important things. That's when she broke from the group. Instead of heading toward the inner gates like protocol dictated, she turned toward him. Her heels changed rhythm on the stone. Slower now, more deliberate. One of her aides noticed and tried to signal, but she waved him off with the casual dismissal of someone who'd never been told no in her entire adult life. The tourists behind the barriers started to notice too. Phones came up. Whispers got quieter. That universal recognition that something unscripted was about to happen. Camila stopped 2 paces from Adeyemi and looked up at him. Really looked like she was studying something that didn't quite make sense to her. And then she spoke, still pretending to matter. "I see." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle, soft enough that only those closest could hear, but loud enough to sting. Then, turning slightly toward her diplomatic guests, her voice rose just enough to ensure everyone caught it. "Sit down, boy. You're blocking the view." The courtyard didn't just go quiet. It died. And Chike Adeyemi, he didn't move a muscle, not even to blink. Here's the thing about moments like this. They don't announce themselves. There's no warning, no dramatic music swelling in the background. 1 second, everything's normal. Tourists snapping photos and diplomats making small talk. The next second, The entire world shifts on its axis because someone decided to say something that can't be unsaid. "Sit down, boy." Those 3 words echoed across the stone courtyard like a slap you could hear. The kind of sound that makes everyone freeze, makes conversations die mid-sentence, makes you suddenly aware of your own heartbeat. A mother near the barrier lowered her phone and stared. A man in a Liverpool scarf turned to his wife and whispered something that sounded like disbelief. Even the school kids stopped fidgeting and went still, sensing something in the air that their teacher couldn't explain in any history lesson. But Queen Camila? She looked pleased with herself, the half-smile of someone who'd been waiting for this moment, who'd finally found the perfect time to return a favor. Because this wasn't random. This wasn't just royal arrogance on display. This was personal. 2 years ago, Chike Adeyemi had made Queen Camila wait, not on purpose, not out of disrespect, but because sometimes duty means making everyone wait, even someone who thinks waiting is beneath them. It was during a high-security gala at St. James's Palace. Foreign ministers, intelligence community bigwigs, the kind of event where protocol isn't just ceremony, it's survival. Camila's convoy had arrived early, tried to use the staff entrance to avoid the main procession, but Adeyemi was manning the perimeter checkpoint. When her car approached, he'd raised one gloved hand, not to salute, to stop. "Perimeter sweep still clearing," he told the driver, not even looking inside to see who was waiting. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't. Either way, it didn't matter. Security protocol is security protocol. So Queen Camila sat in that car for 12 minutes. 12 minutes of watching a guard who wouldn't budge, wouldn't bend, wouldn't make an exception for anyone. Not even her, she remembered. Oh, she remembered. And now, standing in front of that same soldier, she finally had her revenge. Except revenge only works if the other person plays along. Chike Adeyemi stood there like a man carved from granite. The wind tugged at his red tunic. Tourists stared from behind the barriers, and the Queen Consort of England waited for him to react, to flinch, to apologize, to break. But he did none of those things. He simply stood, and somehow that made everything worse. One of Camila's aides, a young guy, sandy hair, probably regretting every career choice that led him to this moment, cleared his throat and took a half-step forward. But the senior protocol officer caught his eye and shook his head. Nobody wanted to be the first to admit this was happening. A diplomat beside Camila shifted uncomfortably, glancing between her and the motionless guard as if trying to solve a puzzle he didn't understand. The mathematics of power, hierarchy, and dignity don't always add up the way you expect them to. "Lovely fellow, isn't he?" Camila said to the diplomat, gesturing toward Adeyemi like he was part of the architecture, always standing, always watching. You'd think after all these years they'd invent something a little more lifelike. The joke fell flat. The diplomat managed a tight smile and looked away. But Chike Adeyemi, he still hadn't moved. Not because he was unaffected. Behind that stillness, behind the perfect posture and the blank expression, a decision was crystallized. The kind of decision that changes everything. The kind you can't take back once it's made. He was going to speak, not shout, not argue, not lose his composure in front of tourists and diplomats and anyone else who happened to be watching. But he was going to speak, because there are some words you don't walk away from. Some insults that demand an answer. Some moments when staying silent isn't discipline, it's surrender. Camila turned as if to walk away, her little performance complete. But before her heel could lift from the stone, a voice rose across the courtyard. Steady, level, impossible to ignore. "Mom," she paused, turned back, and everything changed. Adeyemi's voice didn't shake. It didn't rise or crack or betray any of the anger that was building beneath his perfect posture. It just existed, solid and unmovable, like the man himself. "I've stood for this country through sandstorms, firefights, and funerals." The crowd went from quiet to dead silent. Even the tourists, who didn't quite understand royal protocol, knew they were witnessing something that wasn't supposed to happen. Camila raised an eyebrow, her voice sharp with the kind of authority she'd been born into. "Excuse me." Adeyemi's jaw didn't shift, his expression didn't change, but when he spoke again, every word landed like a stone dropped into still water. "I don't sit for cruelty, not even when it wears a crown." The silence that followed wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't respectful. It was something else entirely. The kind of quiet that comes when someone speaks a truth so fundamental, so undeniable, that everyone listening has to recalibrate everything they thought they knew about power. But it wasn't over. Not even close. You know what happens when someone with real authority meets someone who only thinks they have it? The person with real authority doesn't need to raise their voice. They don't need to gesture or posture or perform. They just stand there, solid as bedrock, while the other person realizes they're standing on sand. That's what happened next. The tourist crowd behind the barriers was processing what they'd heard like people trying to translate a foreign language in real time. A mother gripped her daughter's shoulder. A man with a regimental pin stepped closer to the rope line, his eyes hard. Even the school kids had gone still, sensing something heavy in the air that their teacher couldn't explain. Through it all, Chike Adeyemi remained motionless. Wind tugged at his red tunic. Shadows shifted across his face, but he stood like a man who'd found his center and wouldn't be moved from it. Because this was the moment his entire life had been building toward, not the ceremony of it, not the pageantry, but this, the testing, when everything you are, everything you stand for, gets compressed into a single choice. Do you hold the line, or do you break? Men like Adeyemi don't break. Queen Camila looked at him with the expression of someone trying to solve a problem that wasn't supposed to exist. Her lips tightened. She turned to her aides, voice lower now, but still audible to anyone paying attention. He broke silence. That's grounds for removal, isn't it? One of the aides opened his mouth, hesitated, closed it again, because the answer wasn't as simple as she wanted it to be. Yes, protocol had been breached, but something else had been broken too. Something older and heavier than protocol. Something like a social contract that says you can humiliate someone as long as they're not allowed to fight back. That contract was null and void. Now, from the crowd, a voice spoke up. Not loud, not confrontational, just firm enough to be heard. He earned that silence. It was the man with the regimental pin, the one who'd been watching with the kind of attention that comes from understanding exactly what was at stake. Camila glanced toward the voice but didn't respond. Around the man, other tourists gave him space, and not out of fear but respect. The kind that flows automatically towards someone who's clearly been where respect is earned rather than inherited. The Queen Consort turned back to Adeyemi one last time, and for the first time since this whole thing started, something like uncertainty flickered across her face, because he still hadn't moved, still hadn't flinched or apologized, or shown any sign that her authority meant anything to him at all. And in that moment, everyone watching, tourists, diplomats, aides, even Camila herself, understood something that changed the entire dynamic. It wasn't the guard who looked out of place in that courtyard. It was her. The wind got colder now, but it wasn't the temperature that made everyone shiver. Chike Adeyemi stood there for one more breath, letting the moment settle, letting everyone absorb what had just happened. Then, slowly, deliberately, he moved. Not dramatically, no theatrical gestures or cinematic flourishes, just the smallest shift in posture, the soft creak of leather as his gloved hands adjusted behind his back. The kind of movement royal guards practice until it looks effortless, until precision becomes poetry. But this wasn't about precision. This was about intention. He turned his head just enough that the light caught his face, just enough that his voice would carry across the stone courtyard to every person watching. And when he spoke, it wasn't as a soldier following orders. It was as a man claiming his name. "Ma'am," he said, his voice measured and calm, "you may wear a crown, but I wear my grandfather's name." Queen Camila blinked. That wasn't what she'd expected. "I stand here because 3 generations of my family bled for this country. Sierra Leone, Normandy, Kandahar." His words came steady, unhurried, each one landing with the weight of lived history. "I don't flinch when it rains, and I don't move when they scream in my face, but I will not be told to sit like a dog because someone feels small in silk." A gasp ran through the edge of the crowd like electricity through water. Camila's mouth opened, but the moment had already gotten ahead of her. When truth lands like that, when it hits with the force of something that's been held back too long, it doesn't need amplification. Adeyemi continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of someone who'd inherited stories along with his name. My father scrubbed embassy floors for diplomats who wouldn't say his name right. My mother sat in the back pew at every medal ceremony, smiling while her son guarded a country that still couldn't spell his rank without checking twice. He exhaled once, slow and deliberate. And you, standing there with lace and diamonds, you call me boy. He shook his head just once. Not today. Camila's face flushed, not with anger, but with something more complicated. The confusion that comes when someone who's never been challenged suddenly finds themselves in a fight they didn't know they were starting. Royal life teaches you how to handle rage, how to channel it into policy and punishment. But humiliation? That's harder. That cuts deeper. Her aides looked paralyzed. One of them mouthed something that might have been security, but nobody moved. Not because of fear, but because nobody knew what action would make this better, instead of worse. In the crowd, a woman dropped her phone. The sound of plastic hitting stone echoed louder than it should have. Chike didn't even flinch. When he spoke again, his voice grew quieter. Not from weakness, but from the kind of gravity that pulls you closer instead of pushing you away. You don't know me, Mom, but I've stood in silence while suicide bombers approached checkpoints, hoping their bluff would break before the line. I've carried children out of compounds after drone strikes missed their targets by inches. I've had my face spat on at Horse Guards parade and didn't so much as blink. He looked her in the eye. I've had enough. The courtyard was absolutely still. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Camila's fingers twitched around her handbag strap. When she spoke, her voice sounded smaller than before, like someone who'd suddenly realized they were arguing with the wrong person. You're dismissed. But even she didn't seem certain that dismissal meant anything anymore. Adeyemi looked at her for one long moment, not challenging, not mocking, just acknowledging. Then, with the slightest tilt of his head that barely qualified as a bow, he turned to walk away. The silence he left behind wasn't awkward. It was sacred. But he wasn't finished. Not quite. Chike Adeyemi had taken maybe 5 steps when he stopped and turned back. Not fully, just enough that his voice would carry across the stone forecourt, back to the woman who'd tried to reduce 34 years of life to a single word. I wasn't raised to be still for the sake of stillness, he said, his words taking on the cadence of someone telling a story passed down through generations. I was raised to be still when the world shakes, and to move only when the people I love are in debt. Camila said nothing. Neither did anyone else. Chike's voice shifted into something deeper, older, the rhythm of kitchen table historians who never had microphones but taught truth anyway. My grandfather was 17 when he sailed to Burma in 44. He wore the king's colors then, too. Walked 20 miles a day through monsoon heat with trench foot in his boots, leeches up his legs, and a rifle that jammed every other shot. He shifted his weight, not for comfort, but for the kind of steadiness that comes from roots that go deep. They called him boy, too, while he carried supplies for white officers half his age, while he guarded their sleep, while he bled on soil that wasn't his for a flag that would never quite remember his name. The crowd absorbed every word like they were witnessing something that might not happen again in their lifetimes. My father laid railway track through North Wales, woke before dawn every single day, never missed a shift in 30 years. You know what he got for it? Adeyemi's eyebrow raised just slightly. A clipboard manager who called him boy in front of his own son. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman gasped softly. A man in military dress lowered his head. Chike's eyes returned to Camila. And now I stand here in your palace courtyard, wearing the red of your household, after 2 tours in Helmand, with medals I don't display, because some of us were taught to carry weight without showing it off. And you say it again. He didn't need to shout. The words carried their own power. You said boy like you invented the word, like you didn't inherit it from centuries of mouths that used it to keep men like me in our place. Still, Camila offered no response. One of her diplomatic guests took an unconscious step backward, suddenly unsure whether he was witnessing a conversation, a confrontation, or something deeper. Chike looked at the diplomat briefly, not accusing, not apologizing, then back to Camila. We didn't serve to be thanked. We didn't ask to be named in plaques or poems, but we did not kneel so you could mock us. We did not march so our sons could be called what our fathers were." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of every generation that had come before him. "And we do not sit." That final line didn't just land. It carved itself into the stone of that courtyard, into the memory of everyone who heard it. From the crowd, the older veteran with the regimental pin stepped forward to the very edge of the rope barrier. He stood at attention and raised one hand to his temple in a sharp, quiet salute. It wasn't for show. It wasn't performative. It was for Chike, and Chike alone. A few others followed, not clapping, not cheering, just small salutes, quiet nods, murmured words of respect from people who recognized something real when they saw it. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a scene. It was a reckoning. Queen Camila stood in the middle of it like someone who'd just realized the room had changed around her, and she was no longer the one controlling the conversation. She stood in that courtyard like someone waiting for an echo that would never come. For years, decades, she'd moved through royal spaces with the unshakable certainty that whatever she said would be absorbed, processed, and sanitized by the machinery of monarchy. Aides would smooth things over. Press handlers would craft the narrative. The world would adapt to her, not the other way around. But now she stood alone while a dismissed guard's words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. The people behind her, diplomats, aides, protocol officers, had all found somewhere else to look. Some stared at the paving stones like they contained state secrets. Others watched Chike with the kind of attention you pay to something you've been trained not to see but can't ignore anymore. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then stretched further until it became something else entirely. Acknowledgement that some moments can't be managed, some words can't be taken back, some truths refuse to be buried under protocol. Camila's eyes swept the gathering, looking for someone to restore the familiar rhythm, a staffer who'd swoop in with practiced efficiency, a security officer who'd provide an excuse to move along, anyone who'd help reset this moment back to something she could control. But the only person meeting her gaze was that old veteran in the navy peacoat, arms still raised in salute to the man who'd just reminded everyone what service actually means. The veteran didn't blink, didn't waver, just held that posture with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime knowing when and when not to lower your hand. Behind him, the young mother who'd asked about the word boy earlier still gripped her child's shoulder. The little girl looked up at her, confused but absorbing something that would stay with her long after the details faded. Camila's jaw tightened. She turned toward her aide, looking for the kind of subtle signal that would extract her from this situation with dignity and tact. But he just gave the slightest shake of his head. Not defiance, just recognition that there was nothing to extract her from, nothing to clean up, nothing to manage. The moment wasn't a misunderstanding that could be corrected. It was truth exposed and irreversible. That's when she saw it, a subtle movement in the far corner of the courtyard near the security gate. A royal liaison in a gray coat with silver buttons touched his ear, then glanced her way. The signal, silent, professional, the kind of extraction protocol every royal learns but hopes never to use in broad daylight, with tourists watching, with foreign dignitaries present. Camila's face twitched for just a second, not with anger, but with something harder to name, the disbelief that comes when you realize nobody's going to step in and fix this for you. That for the first time in your very protected life, you're going to have to live with the consequences of your own words. She turned. Her heels clicked once against stone. Then again, her pace quickened. She didn't look back at Adeyemi, didn't offer a final word or gesture, didn't attempt to reclaim control of a situation that had already slipped through her fingers like water. Because something deep inside her, something that existed before the titles and ceremonies and carefully managed public appearances, knew what everyone watching had just learned. There are words that strip away every pretense, every privilege, every assumption about who has power and why. And when you use those words against someone who spent their life earning respect through service rather than inheriting it through birth, you don't get to walk away unchanged. The veteran finally lowered his salute, tears in his eyes that he didn't bother to hide. A few younger guards on the far side of the courtyard stood straighter at their posts, still silent, still disciplined, but different now. In the growing quiet left behind by Camila's retreat, Chike Adeyemi did something that somehow felt more powerful than everything he'd just said. He returned to position, boots together, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on that invisible horizon. All guards learned to find like nothing had happened. But everyone watching knew something had, and it would never be forgotten. The palace courtyard didn't return to normal that day. How could it? There was no official announcement afterward, no press briefing, no damage control, just a quiet reconfiguration of space as people tried to process what they'd witnessed. The moment when ceremonial silence was broken, not by rage or rebellion, but by dignity defending itself. Chike Adeyemi stood his post for another hour after Camila's departure. Tourists continued to take photos, but the atmosphere had changed. People spoke in hushed tones, like visitors in a museum who just watched a masterpiece reveal something new about itself. Eventually, his replacement arrived for the shift change. A young guardsman, maybe 22, who'd heard whispers in the barracks but couldn't quite believe them. "Sergeant," he said quietly as Adeyemi prepared to step down. "Is it true what they're saying about what happened here?" Adeyemi looked at him for a moment. This kid had joined the guards with dreams of ceremony and tradition, who'd probably never imagined that sometimes the most important battles happen in broad daylight with tourists watching. "Stand tall," Adeyemi said simply. "Remember why you're here and never let anyone convince you that service means accepting disrespect." Then he walked away, boots clicking against stone in the measured cadence of a man who'd done what needed doing and could live with the consequence. Behind him, the young guard took position, chin up, eyes forward, carrying himself just a little differently than he had that morning. Because sometimes, the most important lessons aren't taught in training manuals or passed down through official channels. Sometimes they're carved into memory by watching someone else refuse to be diminished. And sometimes, in the shadow of palace walls and royal protocol, ordinary people do extraordinary things that remind the world what true authority looks like. It doesn't come from crowns or titles or centuries of inherited privilege. It comes from standing up when it matters, speaking truth when it's difficult, and never ever sitting down when your dignity is on the line.